Ladies and gentlemen, it's Arthur Smith. Old enough to know better. Hello, I'm Arthur Smith, and my usual opening line is, you might have seen me in the TV series The Crown, where I played Princess Margaret.
Absolutely, when you weren't being a grumpy old man.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I'm a comedian and a playwright. I've written a couple of plays along the way. I was a dustman, a road sweeper. I taught English to foreigners. TEFL, taught English as a foreign language for a few years. Then I was in a pantomime once in Denmark. And essentially, though, I'm a stand-up comedian.
Well, you're multi-talented and multifaceted. So this is all about old enough to know better. So things that you have done that you're really, really proud of, or things that you're slightly less proud of. So let's start with things you're really proud of that you have achieved. And if you haven't achieved them before, would you be striving towards them now?
Well, I suppose probably my best achievement in a way was I co-wrote a play called An Evening with Gary Lineker,
which ran
England? With Chris England, correct. Well done, Bex, on your research. Which ran in the West End for several years and then toured all around the place. So, I mean, being a West End playwright was quite good. But, you know, there's plenty of other things I've done I'm quite proud of. Some of my outdoor walking shows have created some amazing moments. And I put on a whole art show in Edinburgh one year.
Are you an artist, or did you do it?
Well, not really. If you look behind you, you can see some of one of the examples of the things I did. All those variations on street signs like acid trip hazard, and that was a sort of story. You've only got a few of them up there, but I know there's another one I did. I'm sorry I broke your vase, which was made out. I'm just getting it now. Sorry I broke. Oh, the bit's falling off. Sorry I broke your vase.
Oh, brilliant! Made from the vase that you broke.
Exactly.
Genius. Who could not love that?
Yeah.
Even if it was originally a Ming.
Yeah. Oh, well, shit, if it was a Ming, would that be worth anything?
Probably not in those many pieces.
No. Well, it's a work of art. It's a masterpiece.
It is. It absolutely is, and probably signed by the author, which makes it priceless.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have signed it. Yeah. So I did the art show. I was quite proud of that. And another thing I did was I did a whole 5 or 6 series of a show called Sentimental Journey on Radio 4, where I took people away to places that had some significance for them for whatever reason. They grew up there or they lived there. So
was this just people generally or celebrities?
They were celebrities.
Okay.
So I took, for example, Arthur Scargill to Cuba. It was always a good excuse. Sorry, I can't do that. I'm going to Cuba with Arthur Scargill, who, of course, younger people won't know who he is now, but obviously he was...
That's okay, because everybody who listens to this radio show's got to be over 50, so they should know him.
Yeah, and I took Jermaine Greer to Calabria, and Dennis Healy to Naples. Lots of people all over the place. It was a really exciting job to do. I went out to India with Stephanie Cole, and... That was a very exciting, brilliant series of fun and
Which
interesting.
Which was your favourite of the celebrities and the favourite destination with the celebrity?
I would probably say Dennis Healy, actually, who he liked to drink, that's for sure.
He had a good sense of humour as well.
Oh, he was really funny and he was friendly, and wherever we went, he'd end up in conversation with people. And I remember I got him to describe the sunset, and he did it beautifully. He was a really charming man, as was, in fact, Barbara Castle, who I took back to Pontefract, where she grew up. And I just remember me and the producer turned up about half an hour late because we'd been researching something. And she was really pissed off with us and gave me a right bollocking, which she could do. She was famous for that in the Commons. And, you know, she was one of the I think she was possibly the first female cabinet minister. But anyway, and she gave me such a bollock, and in the end I said, well, I'm so sorry, Barbara, I think I'm going to go upstairs to my room and take my own life. And she paused a moment and then laughed really loudly, and then we got on really well after that. Yeah, they were some exciting times.
Fantastic. So there were 6 of those shows.
I know, and there were 6 series.
Oh, 6 series! Oh my gosh!
And there were, was it 5? It might have been 5 series, and there were 6 per series. So,
can we still find them on YouTube?
I don't. Well, they were radio. I don't know. We weren't filming or anything. I don't think they're on radio. I don't think they're on BBC Sounds anymore, which is a shame. They should put them back, because they were very interesting adventures. Because there's no doubt, and the idea behind it, the producer who dreamed it up was called Sarah Jane Hall, who's a good friend of mine. If you take someone back to somewhere they knew very well when they were young, or for whatever reason they haven't been back for years, the memories come flowing back. It was a really good way of getting people to remember their lives.
Fantastic. So what about completely changing the subject? Advice that you wish you'd taken when you were a younger man? Or advice that you're glad you didn't take?
Well, I wish I lived in Paris for a year when I was 20, which was part of my degree, and I was taught English in a school in Paris. And of course, I wanted to become a proper French Parisian, so I took up smoking. And I'm afraid I've given up millions of times, but it's not. So my advice would be, you can be French without having to smoke a load of fags.
Fair enough.
That would be one thing. Also, if I could get in touch with my younger self, I'd say put as much money as you can on L'Escargot at the Cheltenham racecourse in whatever year it was, because that's going to come in at 50 to 1, and then you won't have to worry about money anymore.
Okay, so they say with age comes wisdom, if not necessarily wealth. Do you feel that you're wiser now?
Well, I think in a way, the older you get, the less you know in some ways.
Okay.
Because when you're about 15 or 16, you know everything, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. From about the age of 12, actually. Yeah.
And when you're in your early 20s, you know full well that every conviction you have is entirely true, and everyone else who doesn't agree with you is wrong.
Yes.
So I think part of growing older is coming to realise that you don't really know much. Who was it? Was it Socrates or Plato said, the only thing I know is that I know nothing?
Well, I don't know who said it, but it's a great line.
And I don't get so angry, this is a joke I'm setting up here, I don't get so angry so much these days, and even have empathy for objects. Like, I was in a shop just the other day and I saw a bottle of bleach, and written on it was seriously thick bleach, and I felt so sorry for that bleach.
Because it was really unintelligent.
Yeah, and that is domestos abuse. Yay!
That's exceptional. Very good.
I apologise for
No,
that.
please don't.
But it is true. I don't get so wound up about things. Hey, there's the first siren going by, because we were just down the road from St George's Hospital, Tooting, or just up the road, and you get a lot of sirens go by. I love a siren because I always think, oh, that's some crisis that's nothing to do with me.
Yes, absolutely. And also maybe the police are going to pick up the person who's about to come round and mug you before they get to you. So what about technology? How do you feel about it?
Well,
anything you hate about it?
Nearly everything.
Okay, thought you might.
I'm not very good at it. I mean, I didn't get a mobile phone till 2005, I think, when everyone had one by then, and I got a computer as well, but I don't really understand it, and all the infinite number of social media things and whatnot. And these days, to be a comedian, you have to be constantly putting out stuff on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. I have a joke. I say, I'm so old. I remember when Instagram just used to be a really efficient drug dealer. But no, I'm not very good. I mean, I do my best, but fortunately, my wife is quite good, and she can help me. And if need be, I can always get some passing 18-year-old to come and help me work out on a WhatsApp or what I'm meant to press on the phone or whatever it is.
So you still stop people in the street at random and go, "Excuse me"?
No, I don't do that as much as I used to.
But that kind of brings me on to how you used to do that at Ed Fringe, because you're a veteran of Ed Fringe, first being there in 1977.
That's right.
So I think everybody knows you incredibly well up there, but you used to do... you used to ask people, used to pay people to do.
Well, this was on my
things.
Well, I did one last year. This is my late night tour of the Royal Mile. It started off originally when I was doing a show. I was in a double act then, and with my friend Phil. And by the way, if you're listening to this, not long after we're doing it, we're doing a show at the Soho Theatre on the start of April called Oof, the two of us together. But. We were anyway on this particular Edinburgh. It must have been 84 or 3 or something. We were going on quite late, and as a way of filling up time during the day, I took to pretend being an alternative tour guide of the Royal Mile. So I'd meet people and just make up a load of rubbish and say, oh, and we have to this bit you have to hop because it's in the Edinburgh rules and whatnot. And then I took to doing them late at night. And I still do the late at night ones every year when I'm up there, and that doesn't start till 1 or 2 a.m. and we meet at the entrance to the castle. And I mean, especially in the sort of 90s and early 2000s, they were really wild, because that was in my drinking days, and I used to be pissed, and so did everyone in the audience, and there were quite a few people in the audience as well. And I'd take them down the Royal Mile, and I'd have an opera singer set up in one of the top windows, or I had a mermaid I'd met who was busking suddenly appear out of nowhere, and then I used to pay people to stand up on top of scaffolding and sing Scotland the Brave, and they were pretty wild times. So much so that I got arrested at the end of one of them. That was a very loud late one. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and several people I'd paid to take their clothes off, and we got to the end, and suddenly the police turned up. But I realised that the police used to turn up every year, but that was because Malcolm Hardy, who some of you might remember, who was a wild man of comedy way back, who drowned 20 years ago. He always used to call the police at the start of it, apparently, to make it more interesting. So, yeah, there's a bit of trouble up here on the Royal Mile, and then the police would turn up. And on this particular occasion, Simon, what's his name? Honestly, growing old, you forget everyone's name. Anyway, one of the people was arrested. And then I went down to the station because I thought if anyone's going to get arrested, it should be me. And they came out and called me, and I got arrested. I got charged with breach of the peace and possession of a megaphone. Well, that's what they said when they... And yeah, I had to go to court the following year.
Is it illegal to possess a megaphone?
Well, that's what they said when they read it out. I presume not, but that must have been just the copper making a bit of a mistake. Breach of the peace, essentially, was what I was done for, and I got £100 fine, which I offered to pay at the time, but then they've never sent a letter, and I've never paid it, so I guess technically I'm still a wanted man.
You're a fugitive, in fact.
Yeah, although I have been back several times since, and no one seems to have clocked it.
Nothing to do with the disguise you wear each time you go back?
Yeah, with me big moustache, yeah.
And your trench coat and your big hat.
Yeah, so they were pretty wild. I remember another time on one of those where there was, I don't know if there still is, there's a sort of police lock-up halfway down the Royal Mile, and this must have been in the 80s, because Nelson Mandela was still in prison, and we all lined up outside this little police lockup, and the copper came out looking a bit nervous, and I said, look, we're here because we know you've got Nelson Mandela in there, and we demand that you free him. And he said brilliantly, well, OK, I'll let him out. You go up there and turn right and I'll let him out the little entrance there. So he went up and we freed Nelson Mandela. And I always thought that this little Scottish copper is a brilliant way of dealing with us.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So how do you feel about rules? Sounds like you're a bit of a rule breaker.
Well, I am. I mean, I don't believe you should be able to go and shoot someone without facing some justice. But, well, I don't know. I mean, some rules are in order and some aren't. Yeah, I have broken a lot of rules over the years, but nothing too substantial.
Can you think of any rules that are utterly pointless to you, that just make no sense?
Not really. Can you tell me one? What do you think, Bex?
I can't think of any rules that... I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest.
Well, you just asked the question.
I know I did, but I asked it from your perspective because you're the rebel and I'm obviously a law-abiding citizen, quite clearly.
Well, you know, I am quite law-abiding, really. I have been arrested two other times. Once, the first time I was arrested was when I was a student and I'd stolen a Cornish pasty from the...
Was this in East Anglia?
Yes, well done. East Anglia University, and I'd stolen a Cornish pasty from the little shop there, and I stepped out and I was immediately stopped, and they called the police, who took me to the Norwich police station. It seemed a bit excessive for one pasty, but anyway, and they put me in a... And I think they were looking for drugs because they checked my arms for pin marks and searched me. But all I had was a packet of 10 number 6 and a condom past its use-by date. But then they left me in this room in the police station, and they came back half an hour later and said, "Is your father a police officer?" And I said, "Oh," and I was really worried because my dad is. I said, "Well, yeah." And they said, "All right, you can go then." But
have they contacted your dad?
No. I never told him about it. But they must have just looked me up and found it, I suppose.
Wow.
Because my dad was a copper and he was about the most honest person I ever knew. So I was dreading having to tell him that I'd been nicked, even if it was just for a Cornish pasty.
So what were you studying in East Anglia?
Comparative literature.
Which is?
Well, to give you an idea of what it was, my favourite ever course that I did was Dante, Beckett and Eliot. So it was comparing Dante, obviously, Beckett and Eliot, and Eliot quoted Dante, and Beckett in some ways, paid tribute to Eliot, and all three of them, you could sort of see similarities between them, and that was the idea, to find, even if whatever different languages and different ages, the similarity, what literature has in common with all of them.
So studying literature, where did you want it to take you?
I never really considered what job I wanted particularly. I suppose I thought I'd probably be a teacher. I always thought that's what I would do. And I did teach English as a foreign language for a long time, and I spent a year as part of the course. You had to learn a language to
So was this
degree
when you were in
level.
Paris?
Yeah, so I spent a year in Paris as part of my degree, where I was an assistant d'anglais, an English assistant in a Parisian school there, that was a seminal year in my life, I would say. That year I spent in Paris when I was 20, I had my 21st birthday up the Eiffel Tower having a party, and I always thought of my dad, who'd spent his 21st birthday in a prisoner of war camp.
Wow.
And I did a show about my father and his life.
What was the show called?
It was called Syd, S-Y-D, because that was my dad's name. And he had quite a life. He was captured at the Battle of El Alamein in 1942 and spent 2.5 years as a prisoner of war. And he ended up in Colditz Castle, which of course became very famous later on, years when they made the film about it and the TV series. And he suddenly became, which he didn't really like, a bit of sort of celebrity for having been in Colditz. But Colditz Castle was mainly for officers, and my dad was an orderly, which or Batman as they say, and his job was to really just he'd been working down a copper mine as slave labour before he went to Colditz, so he said Colditz was like a holiday camp, because his only job there was to sort of make tea and sweep up after the posh blokes who were there.
You've written some books, no?
Yeah, I wrote my memoir, my autobiography called My Name is Daphne Fairfax, which was named from a joke I used to do. Good evening, everybody. My name's Arthur Smith, unless there's anybody here from Streatham Tax Office, in which case I'm Daphne Fairfax. Although I have to say I do pay my taxes. But anyway, and I've written, and I've had a couple of plays published. And I wrote another book called 100 Things I Meant to Tell You, which was a sort of series of anecdotes, some of which I've probably already said today.
We wanted to talk about, from the early days of comedy, how you started, who you hung out with, who your influences were, and maybe who you influenced.
Yeah, well, I can't necessarily say who I influenced, but I started in a review group at university, because if you went up to Edinburgh in the 70s, there wasn't any stand-up then. It was only student reviews, essentially. So we went up the same year, or, the years that there were like the Footlights, obviously, who always got a lot of attention with Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie and Emma Thompson and whatnot. But we were a little group there were 5 of us, and we're still very good friends. And we did a show, our first show was called Swing Along a Dante. Dante again coming into it, because I did another Dante show a few years later. And then we did a series of shows with a longer in it. We had Ham Along a Yorick and Pick Along a Dilligo. And anyway, so there were 5 of us. And we did a little radio series, and we were quite successful. But then come the end of the 70s, the start of the 80s, everything changed really, and that's when stand-up started, and that's when I first went to see the comic strip, or when I remember seeing Alexis Sale, and he had a huge influence on me, that he could stand there and talk about the world and about politics, and not just a series of old jokes, which is what most stand-ups then did, and they were dressed in dinner jackets with frilly shirts and bow ties, Stan Baldwin and that lot. And of course they all did jokes that were often quite homophobic or sexist, mother-in-law sort of jokes.
I remember my father used to make me watch Dave Allen, who I'm afraid I do still think is really
no,
funny.
I don't think he really...
It was a sit-down.
Yeah, but he wasn't really in the school of kind of old jokes, and I think he was a bit of an exception, as was Barry Cryer, who was always very friendly towards the new lot. But anyway, in a way, the biggest influence on us back then was Margaret Thatcher, in as far as...
Well, it's easy pickings as far as content goes, isn't it?
Yeah, so, you were either pro-Thatcher or anti-Thatcher, and the old school were pro-Thatcher, and we were all very militantly anti-Thatcher, obviously Ben Elton being another one. And then, clubs started springing up around London. There was a Comedy Store and the Banana Cabaret, which is still going around the corner, and there were lots of comedy clubs started building up, and lots of people started becoming comedians. Some of them were really weird as well, like the famous Iceman, who I noticed has been back again. He used to melt a block of ice as part of his act, and there was Chris Langham, who used to stick a firework up his arse as part of his, and but there was a political engagement, and I remember at the time of the Falklands War, there were very few people who were against the war, but we were all used to be the ones down at the Comedy Store. Yeah, and I took to MCing at the Comedy Store and jonglers in Battersea, kind of one weekend at one and one at the other, for sort of several years. And
when did you do your first solo stand-up show, and do you remember the content?
Well, it wasn't entirely solo because I did it with Tony Hawks, but it was Arthur Smith sings. Arthur Smith sings. Hang on, what's his name? Andy
Williams.
Andy Williams. God, it's so long I've forgotten. Which I only picked as a title to put in the programme in January, but I had no idea what the show would be.
Oh yes, I do remember that you had to let them know the contents of your show up at the Fringe several months in advance.
Well, you had to the title.
Yeah.
You didn't have to say the content really,
Okay.
or you could just sort of, it's really funny or whatever. You know,
Okay.
you didn't have to actually be explicit about what it was about. But so I'd chosen that Arthur Smith sings Andy Williams, just out of the blue really, and. But then, as we got closer to the time of doing the show, I started thinking, oh bloody hell, what's this going to be about? And so I got Tony Hawks. I did it. Well, I will sing a couple of Andy Williams songs like Moon River, but what it was really about was this guy I was fascinated by at the time, who was this sort of proto-Dadaist, and I've always been a Dadaist man, called Arthur Craven, who led this ridiculous life. He was he did terrible paintings, but he reviewed people. He had this little magazine called Maintenant where he slagged off pretty much everyone. He got involved in fights. He did a show where he announced he was going to kill himself on stage. He ended up, and he just led this ludicrous life, and he was a bit of a boxer as well, and ended up fighting Jack Johnson, who'd been world heavyweight boxing champion in Spain, I think it was. It was a sort of money event, and even though clearly Jack Johnson could knock him out in 5 minutes, as he did, but it was, oh look, there's Ruby walking by. Just noticed her out the window, an old lady who lives just nearby.
Everybody has to have a ruby nearby.
Yeah. So anyway, as I was kind of wrote the show on the way up to Edinburgh, and it became a bit of a tribute to Dadaism.
Would you like to elaborate on Dadaism for those who don't know? Yeah,
well, Dadaism, it was the precursor to Surrealism. And it started in 1915 in Zurich, and I've been to the very place, the Cabaret Voltaire, and these people who are all kind of escaping the First World War decided to put on a show that would be completely at odds with everything that had gone before. So it didn't make any sense. They'd all tell a joke in different languages at the same time, and it was this most ridiculous show. And somehow out of that, Surrealism came and Dadaism disappeared. But it was absurdity, really, was its...
Okay.
And I was like the quote of Albert Camus, the realisation that life is absurd should not be an end, but a beginning. And it was the theatre of absurdity, really. And it started absurdity, which grew a bit, but like I say, sort of evolved into surrealism. And Arthur Craven became this figure who they used to admire for all the ridiculous things he'd done.
Do you think his loose genetics with Oscar Wilde may have had a little something to do
well,
with
yes, well done. He was supposedly he was the nephew, I think, of Oscar Wilde. And then he was in Mexico, and he was taking a boat to see his wife Mina Loy, who was an artist. And then
she was pregnant at the time.
That's right. And but then he was never seen again. So they assume he drowned. But of course, even now, not even now, but people used to turn up claiming to have met him or even to be him as well in years later.
About him.
Yeah, that's right. He died mysteriously and lived a ludicrous life, which I suppose is a bit what I feel like.
Brilliant.
But yeah, and then the show went really well though, and I ended up doing a TV version of it, and I think I did a little run of it in London for a bit, and then that also gave me the idea of doing Arthur Smith Sings, because I'm not really much of a singer, but I did do 2 Arthur Smith Sings Leonard Cohen shows.
Because you're he's a big influence for you. He's the foundation of a lot of what you're about.
Yeah, because he's a poet, and I've always loved poetry. And he's also, people always say he was a miserable sod, but he's actually very funny if you listen to some of the introduction to his songs. And yeah, a bit like me, he wasn't actually much of a singer in a way, but as he himself said, the key to singing is just to tell your story. And whether or not you sing it or not, like Bob Dylan's not much of a singer really, is he?
He is not.
But he tells the beautiful stories in his songs, doesn't he? Yeah, and so I was always loved Leonard Cohen. I also thought that doing a show called Arthur Smith Sings Leonard Cohen seems to promise, the grimmest evening of entertainment imaginable. So the only way away from there was up. And it went really well. And then I ended up doing another one as well. And in that, I incorporated stories from my life. And the second one was a bit about my mother, who was then, suffering from dementia, which was quite a hard time for me.
From what age?
Well, it was from really after my father died. So from about the age of 75, she was young. And she was living alone by then. And it was a very hard time as it got worse and worse. I was spending more and more of my time there. But then eventually she ended up in a home up the road from here. So I used to, and they were just marvellous, the people, those carers in those care homes. They do such a wonderful job.
And it gives you peace of mind as well.
Yeah, I know, because I'd never know when she was going to ring up with some mad question or when I had to go and sort of rescue her when she'd been found wandering about in the streets. I could recite you a little poem I wrote, if you like.
Please do.
It's not a funny one, but it's about my mother, whose name was Hazel. Arriving home after the party, they see their neighbour, standing in the street. She asked them for a lift home to London, back home to London. Hazel, they say, this is your home, London's 30 miles away. Her door is open and they take her in and see she has packed a bag, if a packet of biscuits and a jumper count as packing. Oh, Hazel, it is 30 years since you left London to live, as you like to say, in the Shires. But there she still is, the grammar school girl from Camberwell Green, dancing, kissing sailors in Trafalgar Square. It is VE Day and the rest of the century is yours.
That's fabulous. I got me a bit choked. That was absolutely beautiful. So, was your mother a huge influence on you?
She was actually, because although she was from a working class background and she was evacuated during the war and had to look at, and she was only 9 at the time, and she had a sister who was 7 and a brother who was 4, and she had to look after them and keep them together, and so she had such a lot of responsibility.
Where were they evacuated to?
Originally to Crawley, which is not that far away, but luckily they were taken in by a couple who were really lovely to them, and I think that's when my mother first got a love of walking in the country. And she was always interested in reading books and going to the theatre. And of course she couldn't, after the war, from a working class background, there's no way she was going to go to university or anything.
How did she meet your dad?
They met at a dance hall in Streatham. It must have been about 1948, and my dad had just come back from being a soldier, and my mother was only in her early 20s, and the Locarno, it was called, the Streatham Locarno. I think it's a bowling alley now or something, but
at least it's not flats. Everything else is flats.
Yeah. Although people need to live somewhere,
well,
obviously,
yes.
But yeah. So and they got married, and he became a policeman eventually. Yeah, he was a copper but he was the sort of copper who never really liked arresting anyone. I think partly because he'd been a prisoner of war for 2.5 years, and
did that affect him, his mental health? Did he ever talk about it, or did you just put it behind him?
Well, we got him to talk about it. In fact, when he finally retired from the police, we got him to write his memoir, which was it's still the most the possession I love the most that I have. If I had to throw everything else away and keep one thing, I think it would be that.
Have you ever shared it, or have you just kept it?
Yes, I did a show called Sid, about which was sort of about his life and shared some. I mean, he had some hilarious anecdotes because he was a very funny man. He had some really funny stories in his in his account. I'll give you one because he didn't like arresting people. He liked to help people. But one of the things you have to do as a copper, or I don't know if you do, is go and tell someone that someone they know has died. And he told this story about going to the top of a block of flats in Vauxhall, where he had to knock on the door and a lady answered smoking a fag. And he said, "Are you Mrs. So-and-so?" And she said, "Yes." And my father did his best. He said, "I very much regret to say your husband has died." And she said, "Has he?" And shut the door. And he had loads of funny stories about that. I've got a wonderful picture somewhere, actually, I'll show it to you, of this pissed woman trying to kiss him outside the Old Vic when he was on duty. And he didn't know what to do, and he had to arrest her in the end. But someone had taken a photo, which I am now going to show you. There we are. This is my dad. That's my dad.
Seems like his mum reprimanding him.
Yeah,
He's a fine-looking fellow.
Oh yeah. The ladies liked him, and certainly this lady. My joke when I did the show was, and that woman went on to become Mrs. Thatcher.
So we were talking about Sid, weren't we? Sid and his anecdotes. So they met, and then who was the first of the three?
My brother Richard, who he's quite a formidable man. He became a doctor at Edinburgh University. He studied medicine and then spent a year as a junior doctor in New Zealand. And then...
That was unusual. When was that?
Oh, that must have been in the 70s, early 80s.
That's quite unusual for then, isn't it? Because I know that a lot of our medical people go there now.
Yeah, I don't know how it came about, but he seemed to enjoy it. And then when he came back, though, he was more interested in writing and thinking, and so he's a philosopher in a sense, and he became the editor of the British Medical Journal, which is quite a distinguished position. And I always like to say, whenever I see a doctor, my brother was editor of the British Medical Journal. And he just lives up the road, hearing from me in Balham up in Clapham, and he's still going and seems to chair various World Health Organisation things. Then I've got a younger brother who's 5 years younger, who's in the civil service, lives in Tunbridge, is happily married with 3 lovely tall boys. They get taller each one.
So did anyone else go into comedy and playwriting?
Well, my brother Nicholas did a bit of stand-up and loves the theatre, again perhaps because of my mother. And he does a lot of amateur dramatic, Amdram shows. But no, my older brother... Is
he in a little troupe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's... we've always been all interested in the theatre and whatnot.
Would you like to act on stage in a play?
Well, I think I prefer stand-up because you can kind of wing it a bit in stand-up. In acting, you've got to learn all the lines, haven't you, and do...
Unless you're Hugh Grant, and then you're allowed to act.
Yeah. I'm talking of Hugh Grant, who I used to play in my cricket team I used to run, and he... I think it was the first ever night at the Bedford, the Banana Cabaret, and there was a trio, an act on, I can't remember what they were called now, but one of them was Hugh Grant. This was obviously before he'd become a famous actor.
So poetry, you're obviously a lover of...
Yes.
Dante and Eliot. Anybody else that you find wit within? Other than Leonard Cohen?
Yeah, loads of... Well, there's so many poets that I love. U.A. Fanthorpe. What's her name? Wendy Cope. I think she's brilliant. Billy, what's his name? The American one. There's another what's his name for you.
Okay, Billy, what's his name?
Yeah, but there's loads of
Did you ever like the Mersey poets? The Mersey.
Oh yeah.
Because as a youngster, I loved
Yeah.
Roger McGough and Adrian Henry.
In fact, we were talking about my sentimental journey, so I did a sentimental journey with Roger McGough.
Oh, he was amazing.
Yeah, well, he still is.
Summer with Monica.
Summer with Monica.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Oh yeah, and Brian Patton as well. And
oh
Adrian.
my God, I loved him.
Yeah.
I Love You Like a Blade of Grass, I think, or something was one of his. But all of his, the angst in everything he wrote, it was all failed love affairs and really sad. Whereas,
but beautifully,
brilliantly done.
Yeah.
But McGough had so much humour. It was Lily the Pink, right?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Back in the day.
We'll drink a drink. Well, Lily the Pink. Yeah.
The saviour of the human race.
The human race. Hey,
he
was
invented
medicinal compound.
Yes,
Oh yeah.
I'm not singing it though.
You can't still get. Can you still get medicinal compound?
Oh, I have no idea. We could probably make it up. Grind up some Ming vases or something.
Yeah, right, and just flog them for £200 a packet.
There you go. So, what about publishing your poetry?
Yeah, well, I've got a little collection of them I've put together in a file on my computer. Yeah, maybe I should. I'm not sure if anyone would want to buy them, but
I would.
Oh yeah,
definitely. From the Lord's Prayer one you just said, definitely.
Yeah, they're not all funny ones. Some of them are quite sad. In fact, I'm doing the Cockney Poetry gig in a couple of days.
Where's that?
Dalton, and I don't really know. I'm emceeing it with another poet, and people are and people are sending in poems to do and whatnot. So so I keep up my interest in poetry.
I think definitely that's what you should do in 2025. Get your poems published.
Yeah, maybe I should.
Thank you very much, Arthur Smith. It was a pleasure.
Merci bien.